Ça y est, on va
Okay, so let's begin, if it's possible. So asking you again to get back to your places. I know it's always difficult to stop your conversations, but in order to... Shh. It always works. And so in order for you to continue to keep your conversations during the lunch break, well, so we have to start on time. So I would like you to go back to your places, please, your tables. For the rest, we will now have a panel. And so I'll explain how it works. There's going to be three formal presentations, first of all, in order to have the idea of the territory. And so if you refer to the program, and so please in the back, just to give the presentations. When I'm talking so I think that it would be, so this panel is called the affordable social and private residential, 3 presentations and the last maybe 20, 25 minutes with a Q&A amongst. And so you're right, it's very strong, very strong. So myself, we have to come to Montreal in order so we're in our attractive city still, and we're Quebec, and however, I'm convinced that we will talk about a few of the elements linked to this panel, which will be tomorrow. So I'm doing a little bit of tap dance already. And so I'm just introducing you the 3 presentation formal and the guest speakers. And of course, I think that what we're going to talk about tomorrow. So Carole Després, so from the architecture teacher in Université Laval, and she's going to start, and then Nathalie Roussin from the Immeuble Roussin from the Institute of Urban Development in Quebec. She will talk also a little afterwards, and then we have Catherine Boisclair. She is from Vivre en Ville, so she will have about 15 minutes, and so all this will be followed up with a Q&A period, and I would like to open it to the room, but because of the time that we have, I think I'm going to keep it amongst ourselves, so let's start with you for 20 minutes, and thank you for your time. Thank you very much. Hi, everybody. Okay, we'll wait for the presentation. That's not mine. Years on the different triplex, 5 years also on the urban planning, and 5 years at the metropolitan region, so more than 20 years of research that I have, and I proceed also as a qualitative interviews with residents. I did 100 of surveys in these different environments, and today I want to talk, I choose to reanalyze the Léger survey, which was done with a panel, with a citizen of people in November. I don't know if some of you maybe participate in this survey. Are any citizens here in the room? A few of them. Any promoters in the room? Public servants? So I don't know who you are, the others, but anyways, you're funny people in the room. Briefly, so just I have this opportunity then to have the data of the Léger survey and to reanalyze them with my colleague Mario Sterib, who is a professor, and Marco Lopez also, who is a research professional. And so I couldn't. Monsieur Darren and Mr. Bernatchez, Mr. Duchesne. They were talking about, just to give you a context for the city of Quebec. So the city of Quebec, Mr. Bernatchez talked about it, but there's about 542 million inhabitants and 553 square kilometers, so about 1,000 inhabitants per square kilometers, and the density varies. We're 90 household units, so 1 hectare, so that's big, like a bungalow island. So just to give you an idea. And also the density, you can see that it decreases a lot if we go in the periphery of the city. And if we look at the CNQ, which is a territory where Mr. Bernatchez was talking about regarding the market, I don't have a pointer, but you can see in red that the city of Quebec, you have in clear and the metropolitan region, which is where we have a lot of increase a lot of growth for housing. And if we compare with the city of Bordeaux, is the equivalent in the area and in density, area a little bit different, but in density of the Limoilou city. And so in Vancouver and Bordeaux have densities of about 4,500 inhabitants, maybe 5,000 for Vancouver per square kilometer, and this is equivalent of the city of Limoilou. Just in the city of Limoilou, we have this density, so it's important to give your perspective regarding Bordeaux, for example, is like Quebec before the fusions, and so I talked about the merging. And so I talked about the survey, Léger survey, and I'm going to target 3 questions that there were in this survey of the issues regarding promoted the issues in living environments and the priorities in housing and urban design, and to finish with a few findings and a conclusion. And so, as I said, the 1,528 citizens participated in this Léger, and 45% of these citizens, 43% anticipated to moving, 45%, 43% between 18 and 34, 16%, 65 and more. 2/3 are tenants. So this is like what Bernatchez was saying, and 53% are workers full-time. Do we want to move more in certain neighborhoods? Yes, a little bit more in Limoilou, Sainte-Foy, because there's more rental housing in those sectors, but also there's people also who want to move and not move around Quebec City. And so the insatisfaction rate is much higher with the tenants than owners. That's important to retain. Why do the movers that are tenants want to move? In order to become owners, in the first reason, and they would like to have a decent size housing, and also they would change if there was a change in the structure of their family. They also, what did they want? So to the left, what do they want as housing? At the left, we have where they live. So you see the orange and gray bars. So especially with housing with less than 18 units, like duplex and triplex, and having units more than 18 units. What do they wish for? You can see the blue bar. Mainly, they want single-family households. And so we put line and detached and semi-detached housing together, because we can conceive that we cannot do just detached homes or units in a perspective of sustainable development. So we have to review this. And if we look at the different owners that want to move, it's not for the same reason. It's not to become owners, but because they want to have a decent size and a structure, change of the structure also in the family, aging population. And something interesting, 1 out of 4 want to experience a different experience for residential experience. What are they looking for? Well, in blue, you can look where they're living. So it's 71% in single housing. And whoops, we fall to 56%. So a lot of population of single units, but we can see that buildings with more than 18 units would be up over, the transfer would be done there. So what did we do? So we said, okay, well, all these people answered to the survey. And so we want to know, is there more or less opening in certain issues and priorities that the city put forward according to certain variables? So we tested the possibility of the citizens to adhere to some of the 10 issues and 4 priorities that were retained, with 20 variables based on which factors that can influence their judgment. And so the reference note that we took was a man of 44 years old, living in a household, 3 persons, who went to college and who was working full-time and has a revenue between 80 and 99K. So just over the level to have access to ownership. And we took also a profile of an owner, single unit adapted to its physical condition in the plateau of Sainte-Foy, and who would do redo the same residential chores at 15:29 minutes from its work. and very satisfied of the habitation, and very satisfied and would not move by 5 years. And something very important, some factors in choosing a home or living environment for the city to prioritize urban intervention in housing. So the first question that regarding the priorities on the environment. So what importance should Quebec City give to the following issues related to the living environment? And here are what we found in the survey. So you have the safe urban security is in orange. This is what people consider very important. So the urban security was the most important, but you know also that Quebec is one of the most secure cities in North America. So we didn't push forward this analysis. The development of parks and green spaces, and so the more social lodging is what we're going to look at. So the different parks, I would say, is the winner. So planting a tree, not many people are going to contest that. But if we look at the importance, so who is more the profile who is more open, more susceptible to be in agreement with this, these are people, are young people. If you see in white is at the left is people who are more in agreement, are likely to agree more. So if you interpret my little logo, so 18, 24 years old are 2 times 4 likely to agree than 35 to 44 years old. So the younger ones who went to university, first, second cycle, who lives in a bi-parental family, who have a full-time job, who have a revenue in order to become owners, and who live very close from their work or study, and who living presently if you look at the right at the bottom, who are in a residential unit of more than 8 a building of more than 8 units, who wish to move into a building of less than 8 units. So these people are more likely, more open to green development. And you'll see the importance of the development on the first the important. So it's very important this with the tramways that are coming, and again you can see that it's the younger ones and the older ones who are 2 times more open than the market of our buyers of housing. And so you can see is the level of education also is less higher. Maybe older people who have not finished their high school studies and they move alone, and also you have parental families, and they live in small building units, about 8 units, and would like to live in a building of more than 8 units. And so there's 6 times more, if you look completely to the right, more susceptible to be in agreement with the development of than people that are in residential housing and who wish to stay there. So are you still confused with my logos? Okay, so the importance of having businesses at a proximity. So what people are saying, the baby boomers, I put them a long chair for them, but there are so they have a master's degree, biparental families. They have students also that we can find in this. These are not people who anticipate to move. They're happy in their house, and they're 30 to 45 minutes from their place of employment, and they wish to live in a unit which is less to a place where less density. So they're more open to having businesses at a proximity. So we can see the profile here of people who are losing the proximity because they're anticipating of moving, so they're in house or in suburbs, who are losing businesses, and students and biparental families who appreciate to have proximity businesses. And to increase socioeconomic housing. So here we can see the women more than men who are more open. The 54 to 64 also years old, and also families, biparental families, or they're more. You can see the revenues. So this is a profile that we can see the women that are older, who are tenants with a limited revenue, who are in units that more than 8 units, buildings with more units and who wish to stay there or to go into units with 8 units, but who also wish to go into, they're in houses and wish to go into units with 8 units, and others who wish to stay in their houses and wish to stay there. The second question, what importance should Quebec City give to the following housing issues? We were talking about the living environment. Now we're talking about housing. So I retained 4. I don't know if I'll have time, but the maintenance and renovation of housing uses, the accessibility in buildings and adaptation, the access, home ownership access, and the innovation of sustainable development. And so if we look at the maintenance and renovation of housing units, again, the profile of 55 and more comes out. And so my hypothesis is that they're mainly people who inhabit buildings that have more than to be renovated. So you can see these are tenants that inhabit buildings less than 8 units. We can see that with the buildings with walk-ups. And so these are, I did some interviews with students and women who are inhabiting these bad housing units because they really need a program of renovation. And these are people who wish to leave these small units in order to go in a lot of stronger, higher density in order to have something which is newer and better maintained. The adaptation, the accessibility adaptation, all the category of ages are 2 times more open to 4.6 more open to have this priority than the younger ones. There's a lot of women with high school studies where the moving is not probable, but they're tenants and who would wish to become owners. So the adapted ownership and not just housing and the access to ownership. Who wants to access to a house? So more open for the city, that the city would promote, so more women than women, and also with high school diploma, 2-parent families, and also couples with 2 to 5 people, and so households of 5 or more people who have a full-time employment. Look at the revenues, and again, we're talking about social and community household. So mainly there are revenue of just over necessary, just enough to become owners, and so they're open and they're in a house right now, and they wish to have a house. So it's not necessarily the market of tenants that we saw before. And innovation of sustainable development, innovation, this is something that everybody we are preaching. So how this is perceived, again, more opening from women. There are also households of 2 persons that can co-tenants, different profiles of families, big families that can be recomposed families. They're more open than households of 3 persons, which like the typical nuclear family with 1 child. And the students also, that also are more open and inhabit 15-30 minutes to their study or workplace. And the housing, they live in a house, and I would say they wish to inhabit a house. And so we can see here that the 2 last items that we just saw there, these are people that inhabit more houses and they're open to this, and then people who are living in rental housing. And now if we look at the priorities, there was a question also. The city had identified 6 priorities, and I'm going to present 3, and with the time that's remaining. And so the socio-economic mix and the cultural mix and the further density. And so these are going to present this. So you can see the average is over 10, so from 47% to 31%. And so if we look at the generational mixity or mix, there's much more homogeneity in the answers. You can see that the significant factors that influence the opening to generational mix is the education level. So to have a master's degree, more education, and a revenue, which is still limited, a revenue which we need in order to access ownership. So 2 times more open than people who have a double revenue. If we look at the cultural mix, Now, it's very interesting. These are people from university, from the second and third cycle, and more the educational level is higher, more the level of adhesion is for cultural mix is higher. And for myself, teaching at university, these people go alongside, live alongside people coming from overseas. And so this is a hypothesis, but it could come from this condition, and also revenues, median revenue, because this is the net, the gross revenue of the household, not the person. So if there's two persons in a household, and a lot of students, you can see this agrees with the hypothesis, which are small, with a small rental housing units, but would like to go maybe something newer and a little bit more dense. 8 doesn't mean 250. What we saw more than 8. There's a big margin, and also there's still people which are in houses right now and who would like to have a rental. So people who are living in, for example, still with their family, because the young people being retained in the home with their parents is stronger. And also, I will finish with this: densify more, because this is media asks us a lot. We know there's resistance with this, and so how people diversify themselves with this survey. So the men were more open to densification than women, and our typical profile here, the 34 to 44 years, are less open than younger ones and more open than the olders. So there's something relating to age here. And regarding the education, bachelor's degree, so people who have a level of instruction that are lower, and people who have level of instruction which are at university level, at the elementary level, is 15 times more open. So people who have a lower education are 15 times more open to densification, and households of 3 persons instead of 1 person. So it's not a single person households. We know that they have there's different questions we can ask ourselves regarding this, and also the present. So a few observations. So the population of the city of Quebec is not homogeneous in terms of the lodging household vision, and there's different. There exist different meeting points between the different profiles of the of citizens. We have to create a market, and also that the opening with different vectors of change exists with subgroups of the population. For elder, aging women, very instructed. There's a poll there. Tenants with modest revenues, and a lot of students who are still who would like to move to building units. Over 8 units, and also questions regarding the maintenance for units of 8 units and less, and some who want to stay are less who want to stay. So have a bigger part in cultural activity, cultural. And when I look at the literature in Wales, we can look in United Kingdom, the endurance of the suburb, as Mr. Tuderian said, continues, and the access of quality in Dublin. There's something that was we call them in Tiger because the economy was going well. We're building a lot of density in the downtown area, and people who went there and they realized that after a few years, the experience of the strong density, they have a lot of housing units, and so they're stuck with that. And so the research of area of life for children, we're talking about young urban parents, and so they're seeking a quality of life in downtown, but they're struggling in order to keep those not well-served spaces. And also a Swiss study, we're talking about the essential qualities that we should develop. We should talk about the mode of life. So maybe this is more than one variable. So that's it. Thank you. Madame Després, thank you very much. A lot of material for the conversation portion that we will have in a few minutes. So now Mrs. Nathalie Roussin. Thank you. Hello. So, as a president of the regional of the DU that I'm presenting to you, the reflection that the DU had on the intensification, urban densification of the city. In 2015, with the DU, we had a reflection or discussion on the urban planning of the city of tomorrow. So it was the colloque Quebec 2050, and so we took that opportunity in order to refine our vision on the urban planning of the city, but also intensification of the city with the new data that we have, including the vision of the transport, the structure, transportation, and the needs in housing. So this is a vision I wish to present to you. I'm very proud of this because we did work with all the people that are linked to ownership, housing, and to develop a common vision of the city. And also, we have had as a relationship the transportation network, and also to intensify the city on the principle of TUD area development and quality areas. So in order to do this, we identified 4 poles, economic poles that I will present to you. And so, first of all, I'm going to talk about the context, the contextual studying and our method approach, and also the different areas under study. And so, the urban intensity is a densification which we are wish for. Live, work, shop, and play. So we took that into consideration. And first of all, some studies show this, but the urban sprawl is progressing more and more in the city of Quebec, especially on the North Shore. And we can see here the different regions where the destinations are towards those 7 poles that were mentioned, which are being generated and which continue to generate a lot of displacements or moving. And in order to talk to you a little bit about the TOD concept, this is really to develop some housing that are more dense in order to give properties that will gain in value, but also sectors where walking, other modes of transportation will be privileged. There will always be access. I think we're a city where the automobile is present, and so we have to preserve cohabitation, but also we need to enhance other modes of transportation to be more efficient. And also this includes necessarily diversity of usage in order to ensure that that these sectors can develop fully. And so, in order to talk about the methodology that was mandated, we mandated an urban, Mr. Steve Potvin, Stantec, in order to accompany us, and Mr. Normand Hidon, also for co-architecture, and from Gilbert Deschênes, who accompanied us to develop what is the potential of development for residential as well as employment in the different sectors. And so to do this, we identified different sectors, specific ones, and we rated the lands if there were lots, if there were vacant that can be used in order to be developed, or if there were some restrictions. So we identified different lots, and in order to put different the percentage that will be residential, commercial, office, etc., and industrial. This is how we arrive at a proportion for development of number of household units and employments created per sector. And so we do projection, of course, an idea of the future. And so we're talking about over 20 years. And so that's why at the end of the presentation, I'm going to give you the number of households and employment per sector. The 4 poles that were identified, the Chaudière pole, so near Cap Rouge in the sector of IKEA, the Sainte-Foy west entrance and Route de l'Église, Saint-Roch also in Expo City, as well as Le Bourgneuf. So these are 4 sectors which allow an intensification, major intensification.
If I present the Boulevard Chaudière pole, this is the head of the beginning of the tramway that's in this area. There are many vacant lots in this area that to be developed. You see here the densification of the different lots, whether they are vacant or to be redeveloped, or for a potential for increase, or if there are any constraints. During our reflection on this, many promoters discussed together to establish a vision of the development potential here, and what came out of this for this Chaudière pole was to have a development where cohabitation of different uses could be optimized. That is, there would be housing, more dense housing, businesses, employment sectors, technologies, and go all the way to light industrial as well. What is important here, if you look at the dotted line here, this is a suggestion for the future tramway. In this case, there would be a deviation towards inwards into the lots to the full potential of the use of the tramway, because for each case we think that the tramway route should be more dense and at the heart of the main streets, and for the exits from the tramway. And we established that the potential of serving the airport, we should really have that as a future objective. So it's to target cohabitation for the different active modes of transportation, car, pedestrian, and create living environments that are friendly, and ensure cohabitation of the different uses. Here we see that the proportion of vacant lots is more significant than in other sections in the Chaudière pole. So, which means that we could have 3,850 extra units, 268 new jobs. 3,000 in all, 3,000 new jobs in all. 1,994. Sorry, I didn't catch that. So this sector in Sainte-Foy at the west entrance, this must continue to be developed because it serves the South Shore. It should be one of the most dense poles to optimize the vacant lots and ensure that the development, when we talk about vacant lots, we're talking about parking spots that could be developed with streets in the background, and so that this can become a neighborhood where there's a dynamic living environment, as well as develop not the Route de l'Église as an urban walkway. Here you see the trajectory, and for Boulevard Laurier, these are definitely lots with potential for redevelopment. That are the main lots to create 7,000 new residences and 3,100 new jobs in this area. In the Expo Cité area, we identified 2 poles. Expo Cité Saint-Roch. Saint-Roch is definitely the cultural and economic center town. Expo Cité, there are many activities around the Videotron Center and around the public market. So it's to attract new residents in this area and support the environment that's already there. If you look at this here, you see the zones that are identified. What we suggest is to plan for a link between the tramway from Saint-Roch to Expo-Cité to ensure a full development of the potential in this area. Make this sector attractive with the cultural and distinctive aspects where those can be showcased, whether culturally or technologically, so that this sector could develop its full potential. We see again here that the development for lots, there are huge possibilities for property development or land development that's already established. To create in this sector welcomes 7,000 new residents for a total of 1,358 new jobs. In the Le Bourgneuf pole, this is an employment pole that is very significant. The Boulevard Le Bourgneuf splits up this densification from the residential area to the commercial area. So what we want to do is to increase densification along Le Bourgneuf Boulevard and ensure a harmonious transition between the residential sector and include proximity services for the clientele. So this is the established sector. It's really Robert Bourassa, Le Bourgneuf, where the potential could be developed a lot. And we propose that a future trajectory for the tramway from Expo-Cité could serve this clientele. Again, if we want this to be a friendly and dynamic area, the roads, the construction along the Le Bourgneuf Boulevard with opening of businesses on Boulevard Le Bourgneuf would allow for a more dynamic sector and allow a transition with the residential area. Here again, there are many lots to be redeveloped, constitutes more than 80% for redevelopment. And the result would be welcoming 17,000 new residents. We counted about 2 residents per unit for a total of 5,000 new jobs. Following this reflection, some major ideas evolved from this all. I won't read these, except that what's important is that this is a vision that is nonetheless innovative to bring as much development in this sector. And the only way to get that done is definitely to work in partnership with the public authorities, with promoters, the city, the governments, so that the living environments are created and that the owners and real estate promoters can provide housing in compliance with the needs of the customers or clientele, where residents will be able to fully utilize the structuring transportation network and set aside their car or use only one car per household. So these are the reflections we had for housing for the city of Quebec. And we will close this conversation on the best means of densifying the territory. Catherine Boisclair will not have the last word for this presentation. Catherine Boisclair, I'm coordinator of a project for living in the city. I'm from Lévis, but I've been on this side of the river for a long time, and I am very happy to see this going on as an active citizen in my city. And today I represent living in the city for this presentation, Vivre en Ville. For densification in Quebec City is, yes, in my backyard. I will talk to you more about that today. First of all, I will present the organization for which I work. Living in the city, Vivre en Ville. We stimulate innovation and accompany the decision makers, professionals, and also citizens in the development of quality living environments. We are passionate about quality living. Prosperous and favorable for everybody in the search for collective interest and the respect of the capacity of ecosystems. So it's sustainable development in the urban centers. We are about 38 people between Quebec City, Montreal, and Gatineau. Our headquarters is in Quebec City. We've been there for 25 years, and I think our president, Alexandre Turgeon, is there for those of you who know him. We don't only do awareness, we do research, training, accompaniment, awareness, and also defense, which is the point of the iceberg. You do have Vivre en Ville come out on certain issues and take position. We work in Quebec City, but also in Montreal. I'm very happy to be here today. And our collection of books here inspired to equip Quebec City. We have 10 publications in this collection, and one of the key messages is that we need to change our mode of development. And I think the presenters before me have set the table well, but I'll go through this quickly just to transit-oriented development, the TODs. We were inspired by Collingwood Village in Vancouver, but also many examples throughout North America to see how we can revamp the city, starting with public transportation, building in the proper place, to grow without sprawling, and also be successful in more density housing. Higher density housing. So these are from 40 to 110 pages for a professional public, but more and more we started to work with other types of actors, promoters and citizens. And for the promoters, we published different brochures on green densification. Densification is not always a positive, doesn't always have a positive spin to it in people's minds. We all want to live in some sort of cabin in the forest, but unfortunately we need to rethink the way we live because we do live closer together on the territory, but rather than messing up nature and pushing it back all the time, is to create more green living spaces where we need to and want to live. So we have brochures here to inspire such practices. And here is the project. Let's become allies for quality living environments. We wanted to get closer to the population, so with our wonderful publications of 120 pages, we said, okay, this is a vocabulary that everybody and an issue that everybody should relate to. I'm glad here that we have involved citizens. When Brent Toderian said we want to go from yes or no discussion to a conversation on quality, well, then this project, Yes in My Backyard, Oui dans ma cour, it allows us to have that conversation around the quality of densification and intensification. And we are funded by the Fonds Vert Quebec, which is the green fund from the Quebec government for this project. And why I mention this, because it's the main strategy to reduce our GHGs in our transportation practices. 40% of our GHGs comes from transportation of individuals, and the distance that people have to travel between their residence and their job. I don't have much time. I will, 4 key messages for our project. The first one is the why. The necessity of densification. Why is it necessary? And we give free conferences to citizens, and we accompany municipalities for such projects for densification. And we always need to start by the why, because it's not obvious. We're in a change dynamics. You're all experiencing this in your organizations. Change isn't easy, and when it comes into our street, our our neighborhood, the investment we invested in our neighborhood on our home, this becomes very emotional. So to start with the why is always a winning element. Also, the advantages of densification, and we'll find those advantages only if we increase the number of housing units in the proper area. And then number three, how we densify. This project, yes, in my backyard, deals with this. The densification, what kinds of forms will that take? We always talk about huge towers. Densification is only a number. It can be achieved in so many ways. So this is part of the discussions that we have with the citizens and the promoters and the municipalities. And fourth, the process. How will we do this? So our project is to provide tools for a constructive debate. It's really not easy to talk about transformation in a city. We see this in the media. I'll come back to that. First of all, why? And briefly, because my predecessor set the table well, why do we want to transform our urban development modes and make sure that there is an increase in the living environments already existing? We want to protect our agricultural territory, natural environments, reduce our GHGs emissions, welcome our demographic growth, better manage our public finances, reduce our energy consumption, and improve public health. There is a direct link here between public health and being physically active in the urban area. Walking, for example. Characteristics of sustainable living environments, the characteristics are known. And if we look at GHGs, we know that people who live in densified areas where there's a proximity between housing and other activities, business, and there's a mixity of activities and different kinds of transportation, multimodal transportation. This is an environment where people use less, have a carbon imprint that is a lot less per person. So with the issues that we mentioned earlier, we are able to create areas for our populations in places where there are already these characteristics, but multiply the living environments with these characteristics. And when we talk about densifying the existing areas, we talk about diversifying the offer of housing. So to bring more housing in the central locations and smaller housing in the bungalow areas where there's a where diverse needs need to be met, where we can diversify this offer. And so I would say that some of here you have the Montcalm quartier on Rue Cartier, Cartier Street. Here you have the characteristics of a favorable environment and a sustainable environment. And some other places have that potential, and that was Carol's intervention with the peripheral areas where people are already close to their jobs. And in Quebec City, which areas have these qualities? Well, Quebec City identified 60% of new housing between 2031, and this is an old map, it's evolved since, should be along the public transportation structural network. So we talked about 30,000 new households, 60% new households between now and 2031. They will have to be built in areas that are already inhabited. So we're looking close to the new transportation system and their jobs. Maybe your neighborhood will change. For the TOD, transit-oriented development, we had good TOD, bad TOD. It's not just to build housing close to a bus stop or a public transportation stop. There's bad TOD as well, transit, and so our lifestyle is so centered on the automobile. There are risks associated to think only about public transportation and housing, there's a lot more than that needs to be discussed. So in our context, where 60% of new housing should be along the public transportation system, our housing vision will have to look at consolidation, requalification, and making our neighborhoods greener. So in living in the city, we like to talk about desirable densification. Is it possible to have this densification that meets the aspirations of the households? I'll go through this quickly, but these are only quality issues. If this is what we want to replace suburbs with, the single household with a backyard, this is not attractive. We can understand why. Certain images come to mind when we talk about densification, and we say, no, I don't want this, I'm not interested in this. However, there are all kinds of transformations that are already being done, which shows that the increase in housing units in a neighborhood that does have a potential for sustainable living environment, could have these qualities. Here are a few transformations by replacement. Here you have a bungalow that was transformed in a three housing unit building, and you can see here that the neighbors will be more favorable to this and will appreciate the transformation. It can also be townhouses in Quebec Center town, but also in Val-Bélair, where there's an effort for integration with the bungalow on your left. And the building is a bit lower when it's right next to the bungalow. And then they added and the last story are more aired out. You see they're close to the bungalow so that it can harmonize more with the neighborhood. You know this one, quite major. This was before. It's a former service station where we added we could have looked at more green efforts, but there is an effort to create life with all these windows on the first floor. And certain industrial sites in Quebec City have been transformed, and there's a huge, wonderful quality here. So densification, is it only to deteriorate an environment? No. I think we can refine the messaging with regards to densification, and that it can go towards, it can be of something of quality. There's a lot of opposition here when we transform living environments, whether the increase in housing units, the creation of new businesses, new constructions, but also transformation of public spaces. The roads are public spaces, reserved pathways and roads for streets for bicycles or cars or other transportation. We see that in the different environments, the concerns are similar. We're scared of change. We don't want this to change too much. We won't have enough parking. There's too much circulation, too much traffic. We'll lose some sun. The infrastructures have the capacity to welcome this new population. They'll be noisier. We'll lose our neighborhood's actual character. These arguments come again and again, and these are concerns that are legitimate. And I invite you to treat these concerns as being legitimate, even if deep down you have a whole bunch of counter-arguments to say, yes, we must do this, because this debate, we want it to be constructive. The project, Yes in My Backyard, provides tools to better discuss and understand each other as soon as possible. We are looking at the vision for housing right now. We're not out on vacant lots or neighborhoods with bungalows that we want to rebuild. Right now, we need to have these difficult discussions, because once promoters have invested and then citizens come up against that, it's too late. And then we have to do catch-up work, and people who have invested in lots and property, there's a lot of work to be done upstream to make sure that everybody works towards the same goals, citizens, promoters, and municipalities. So this project, Yes in My Backyard, we want to mobilize, inform, equip, and accompany for the transformation of these living environments, and we talk to the citizens, the promoters, and the municipalities. The promoters are important in this discussion because they have their own considerations. They have money issues. They are building this because the municipality are the ones doing the building, not the partners are the ones doing the building, not the city. So we want to make sure that for our projects that there is housing to welcome the new population. And we speak to these, we do this through a website, online tools, and accompaniment that we put in place across the province. Our tools, yes, in my backyard, oui dans ma cour, Quebec. You can also register for and subscribe to our newsletter. The content is also online. All of the pamphlets and brochures are there. We've gone to 11 fairs. You can call us, and we provide a conference with this exhibition. It's to talk about all of the possibilities that exist when we want to densify the city and the request that can be made to make sure that it contributes to our living and the quality of our living environment. To each context, it's formed. This is the kind of information we provide in our exhibition. This can be done in many ways. And the actual character of the environment. It's not only in height that we don't only want to talk about height. We also want to talk about other elements. When you're in my neighborhood and you're in single family housing, there are other elements to take into account that make for your neighborhood being what it is. Do you have sidewalks? How large is your road? Parks? Businesses? Are there any around it? School? Social experience? There are many, many things that can be added to these discussions with regards to densification. We have online videos as well, including, and I'm finishing with this, on the important keys for a successful densification. And we've interviewed promoters on how to work with the municipalities upstream, because promoters are asked to change their practices and consult with the population themselves. They're not only building condos for future owners, but also a piece of the city, a part of the city, and stakeholders are multiple in that from that perspective. We do a lot of accompaniment as well. I can talk to you more about that if you have any questions on that. And I have a questionnaire or survey to evaluate real estate projects. It's to come out from a reaction mode and to go to reflection mode, to develop a common vocabulary in urbanism. There's a lot of jargon, acronyms. Be careful with acronyms, please. PPUs, PCU, PMAD, you name it. And to have a better argument and a logical argument so that we can build a city together that we would like to see. And the example of Seattle here, and I'll finish with this, they had a campaign to the effect that densification, who is it for? And to talk about buildings and cutting down trees, yes, but also talk about who are we doing this for? For the teacher who teaches at your school, and she doesn't need a whole house. She would like to walk to her work, and she would like to have a smaller home or living area. Would you like her to be your neighbor? Thank you very much. Thank you, all three of you, for having set the table for all this better than me when I presented the workshop. Thank you for facilitating, proxy facilitators. We have a lot of questions. They are all very I have some very basic questions. The resistance to change and densification, could we say in an optimistic way that this is a problem that will decrease with the demographics, that the younger generation will be more sensitive to the advantages, and the more we move forward, the less battle we will have to convince people of the usefulness and the beauty of such a densification? This is a huge question. I would like a short answer. Maybe. In fact, maybe, but I think that the more we will densify, if the projects don't contribute to life, to the quality of life, we will have a backlash. So it's the importance of the quality of these projects and that it meets the needs, that we have a diversity of offers. It's not because we're young that we all have the same needs, but maybe a greater sensitivity to this, a greater awareness to be able to walk to work, for example. Yes, absolutely. It's not so hard to convince them, maybe. We could hope. Earlier, you said something very quickly at the end of your presentation about the Tiger's economy, half success or half failure. Some people who have chosen to live in areas that are densified, but that did not adhere to this proposal. Why didn't that work? Were we able to find that out? The English communities are a bit like Quebec. They have a heritage of lots of green spaces around the and in the center of the city we have young families with children. Experientially, people, only for a few years, oftentimes it's children, there's a lack of community places. It's the way to do it. People don't, on the long term, won't find what they're looking for. We can't think that we'll be staying in the same housing area or the same home either.
Especially a mixed city, that as we wish to do. So it's 1/3 of stable citizens and the other tenants. It's a bit normal. So that's about the ratio that we find in the cities. Dynamic cities. If we just put owners, we don't have this diversity and this wealth of. So Dublin tried it, and they had a lot of problems afterwards with a lot of housing units that were rental housing, which were difficult to rent. So what we want to do is, can we feed the families? So we're talking about the why. We densified, but maybe we didn't do it the right way. Well, as I showed in my presentation, there's different profiles. It could be profiles that are of people who will go into these environments. We saw more elderly women, young professionals without children. And so Catherine showed it when she talked about densification in first crown suburbs. When we have 15 housing per hectare, we have a place to give to these households which are looking for a lot with a bungalow. So this market is not developed. We're just talking about density with elevator. And so you can look at Chemin Sainte-Foy between Robert Bourassa and l'Hôpital Laval. It's horrible what's being done regarding density for tenants, for handicapped people right on the street. So there's no quality of space there where people are going to stay there a long time. They will go there. They have to go to university. So it's very accommodating. And so I found that for young students, yes, Mrs. Roussin, and I can piggyback on this. We're going to assist a different mode of habitation, of lodging. We're going bringing the population to another type of environment, and for this we need adaptability. Our clients, their needs, our citizens, their needs change, and so if we want to them to leave a single family unit from far away and to come in and live in the city with the structured transport network, so we need to adapt. And for urban projects, every change of living space, you're losing comfort for something else. But there's a transition to be done. And I'll ask you a question, which is very profane and maybe. But in the light of everything that you're saying with development of the zones, with mixity, a mix of and access to businesses, in a world which is more and more we're buying online, does this kind of screw up because a lot of people are doing their shopping online, and so is this crazy as a consideration? Will that have an impact on planning, or if not, there will not be any impact? Well, I'm not a specialist on marketing businesses, but we're working with many of main businesses, but it's more my colleagues working with the businesses. But the street, the commercial street, because it seems to be an attracting factor when we want to densify. Yes, and it's an experience per se. When we live in a commercial, mixed commercial living alive, we can walk around. It's not just businesses we can do online, but the different different socialization places, different parks, different reasons why we want to go to these places. So there's combined traveling also, and it's an experience. We start to know our local businesses. And many times we want to find distinctive banners, and so there are relationships being created with these people. But Carole, you put your head down, maybe just with this possibility of this threat, because what is the advantage if we can have everything delivered at our door? What is the advantage of being a proximity to a certain businesses? Well, there's different factors that we have to take into consideration. A more active lifestyle, the market, going to the grocery store. If there's a grocery store, there's a less 400 research 400 meters unless we can. Yes, 200 meters unless it's a winter. You're going to walk to the grocery store, but of course that's not the reality for everybody. And there's decisions also being made that call upon the transformation of different representations of our lifestyle. Do we keep our Costco card? Do we cut it up? Do we decide to buy local? So I think also there, when you're talking about the submarkets and the young people who have an opening to that, and what we're eating, if we want to eat more locally, and to encourage the local economy. And I think there's but it's not everybody, but I think there's a possibility to serve different proximity services, so people have to have an active lifestyle and walk. But it's a little bit what it means to be a citizen. That together we can have maybe something as a community, and to be to have solidarity with our community. And I'd like to add a point, because in the urban planning, we have to take into consideration the arrival of new technologies. And yes, there's a type of delivery, there's a type of traveling, so we must not neglect the delivery on place, on site, which exists, because some businesses will exist, and the needs of the businesses, and also the business owner, if he cannot live only by of his own sector, so we have to think that the business owners will have to live also from regional markets, not just local markets. So we need to have a discussion on this, because the business owners cannot all live only from at the 400 meters. And yes, I'd like to continue on this, talking about the digital city, not just a delivery, but the possibility to what we do urban planning. And so Université Laval started to change the schedule of the to free up the bottleneck of students' schedules, and even in Europe with public servants to have open hours, and with more flexible working hours, and people don't want to do it because they fear their reputation. But what would keep people from working at home on certain days and then becoming consumers of local proximity businesses when we live in a central neighborhood? Catherine, quickly, regarding the commercial and the competition online, we do we want to consolidate the existing businesses in order to reinforce the clientele, to create Todd neighborhoods, and in order for us, that's not a solution, but we want to see people moving, and so we're favorable to reinforce the existing neighborhoods, and we don't want neighborhoods where we have the SAQ, the grocery store, and all the businesses every time. Maybe there will be smaller businesses, but will be linked by transportation. And maybe Mrs. Wissin, you can say, you can add, is not in contradiction with your projections. If we say the objective is 60% of new construction be a proximity, walking distance of the new network. So this involves that there's going to be densification of all this network, and that we will not just look for a developed zone where there's going to be a sharing or redistribution of the pie with the development of the tramway network. Yes, in Montreal, we have Todd neighborhoods everywhere, and we ask them to think about that not all there's not all the neighborhoods will have the same. So in order we need to recreate lifestyles, and I think it's important to really say that there are some places that will be really very mixed neighborhoods, and other that will be end of line. It will be because there will be also the issue of parking, and so we need to think of a typology of different criteria. Mrs. Roussin? Yes, and we must not neglect also in these sectors of housing, the market, the job employment, to decentralize. It's not just the businesses, it's also places to go to work. Either it could be technology or business areas. And maybe this is the most the question that is more do we let the market just continue? Maybe we have a silence here, but yes, in light of all that we discovered today, there's a pivot turning, a structuring pivot turning in Quebec, and all those who want to invest in the transportation infrastructure, and your study is clear on that. There's a lot of spaces which are underdeveloped, not developed, that could become new poles of development, residential poles, commercial, for employment. Or do we bet on the good common sense of everybody, or do we just give ourselves parameters and we force a little bit how to do things? So I can see some different. So for me, it's urbanism. Well, go ahead. I think it's our job as citizens also, but yes, of course, we have to structure urban planning, and it's the sprawling of activities. Do we have to be coercive? Yes, but on urban planning, zonage is very coercive. We permit some. Some zoning in some places and other places not, and so we give a lot of place to moving, circulation, and so the responsibility not just of urban planners but also the deciders to think about this structure in order to do management of transportation and reduce at the source the motorized circulation, and so really we need to plan this. Finally, and I see that the conversation to do is not just planning. It was not finally planned in the past because a lot of development was left by itself and we cannot blame anybody because yes, we finally planned. Yes, we always say that we're the king of sprawling in Quebec, but we have to see something that says people are established. We allowed people to buy housing and to establish, and they invested, and and now they're attached to their place, and because most of young Quebecers were born in the suburbs for many generations, and we're genetically programmed. And in Copenhagen, for example, people go from downtown, and we quote these cities for centrality, but these people, there are studies that show that this problem of attachment to our garden, they gave to their children what they received, so people leave Copenhagen, and also the price of housing is a factor. But we have to say that the equation is not easy, and also the arbitration. Also in a household, we're not always working close, and so now I think the model of downtown and suburbs is not the same now. There's people in the urban planning who have no cars, and others who have 2 cars. So just to be practical, and maybe. You might be interested with this because it talks about development. Should there be specifications for promoters who want to develop with obligations in a way with how to develop this mix, or we just trust everybody's common sense? Well, I think definitely that there should be an established vision with all the different factors of the market, and this is one of the initiatives that we have. And I think today. Talking about vision with the whole, how do we manage that? And at the end of the day, who takes the decision? Well, yes, effectively, we need a ruling. We need a clear way to establish and to be transparent. But I think that after that, it has to be the market who dictates the needs. The promoters, they always meet the needs of the clients, and some cities are putting in place specific rulings when we think about the size of the household of the rental housing, because the clientele is asking for this, and so we have to build sites meeting their needs, but not to specifically leave the adaptability to the market, but also to the requests and the demands of the clients. Catherine, yes, to come back on the different rules. When we talk about finally planning sprawling, before we were planning the different poles, and now it's the housing, and now employment, and now we're talking about mixed neighborhoods, and now we're coming back. So I want to bring mix. We need to bring mixing in this area. So of course we need to establish rules. Yes, there's the demands of the markets, but there are some different. The obligation also of the bigger housing, and so we're thinking about this in Montreal now, and I think we will have to bring this on the table to see when we see families in Quebec. But to bring them back, yes, to families. Yes, we were talking about in transportation the metropolization of the bus network, and to make this much easier to take the bus. But I'm talking about the suburbs, the suburbing of condos. How do we make people want to inhabit a more dense area? So we're talking we can do non-circulation downtown. There's different ways that we can diversify the products that exist in order to make it profitable, desirable for a diversity. And right now we do not have in mind, for example, is there a lack of imagination in designing the densification? Absolutely, and we have to be careful not to go in the trap of sustainable developments, which are characterized by gadgets that we put on our house or in the house. We have to invent formulas that allow more dense housing, but managing, for example, a small house on 2 stories they can have a rental room for a student. There are different complex models that exist that allows a young person to buy something and pay their taxes, and then the family is getting better. We don't have a lot on the structure of housing. People don't buy much outside, because once they buy it, they're inside and they look at the number of rooms, the quality of the rooms, the structure of the housing. And I would say be careful also not to go with this model of 5-6 stories only. We can do a lot of housing, town housing. We can also find 50 housing per hectare, and we can have more dense than just walk-ups of bad quality. So there's different inventions that we can do for densification that are not expressed with a elevator building, which I see more and more today. And it's to assume that all these 30,000 households want to live in that, and I think that we can find ourselves with a very big mistake by projecting what would be, well, in other words, to live for people and decide for them. Yes, we talked about inclusion and affordability, and to do this in these neighborhoods, we need to create living spaces, but many times we're tempted to create these spaces and the parks and the management of streets and the different pedestrian sites, and so this increases many times also the pricing, and these become rentals that are too expensive. And when we talk about all the management, outside management that belongs to the cities relating to these projects, so they become projects that are less inclusive, less affordable. So we have to rethink this model. I'll just finish with this curiosity, because we want to have cities more transportation by pedestrians and by bicycling, and so we have a transition period now where it hurts to renounce to your car, and we don't have yet the advantages of so do we have examples of communities where the transition is about completed, and we can say, well, it took 15 years or 10 years, and then people realized that they found their happiness, or it's still a utopia to which we're seeking? What's a big question, and quickly for us. We have a lot of inspiration in North America, but I think their transformation is always ongoing. There's always new needs of the population. The needs are in being different. There will always be people not satisfied, but we always have to ask why. Why do we do this? And why do we want to create? We need to create the space in order to have this dialogue. And I think you'll have the last word. I think we forgot that we did a merging of cities. I was talking about Bordeaux, which was the equivalent of the Limoilou city, and that's 5% of the population of territory of Quebec and 20% of the population at that scale. Yes, it's absolutely plausible. Now, we merged a lot of suburbs, and we want people to go from Lac Saint-Charles in their bicycle to go downtown. That is impossible. And maybe the reflection we have to do is to think about a scale with the different where you can bicycle and cycle, and this involves employment also regarding the different suburbs. But people don't think just this is my problem with the taught, and I taught this for many years, and I'm still teaching about this. But we assume that people are working on site, but life is more complicated than that. Yes, of course you're right. Yes, life is more complicated than that. So that's what I say generally. Also, it's more complicated than we think. And what is not complicated is the lunch break. And so we will have this in the next hour and a half in 6, 7, and 8, 9 rooms at the south. So please come back around 1:20 for the workshops that start back at 1:30. So have a good lunch, everybody.